Welcome back, everyone. The game is starting in 5 minutes, and I just realized that I didn't record anything today. So I'm playing against Ivan Saric, who is my strongest opponent here. His current rating is like 2680. His peak was around 2700, a bit more than that. So yeah, it's going to be a super tough game, especially considering that I have the black pieces. He's really, really strong, and especially with white, he's always pushing. And yeah, he's just a very uncompromising player who really wants to win. So it's not going to be easy. By the way, he was also European champion in 2018, so that also speaks quite some volumes on how strong he is. So yeah, let's see how it goes. I will just try to enjoy the game, just try to enjoy playing such a strong opponent. Welcome everybody to the recap of today's game. As I've already said before, I played against Ivan Saric today, the Croatian #1 for many years already, and he was European champion also in the year 2018. So he's been among the top players for many years, and he even beat, among others, he beat Magnus Carlsen in the Olympiad, I think in 2014, in a crushing game. So he is really like a super uncompromising player, especially with the white pieces. He's always trying to play for the win. And yeah, I was a little bit worried how the game could go because he's just so strong. But yeah, let's have a look how the game ended. So I had the black pieces. He started with knight f3, which I also did prepare for. His main move for many years was to go e4, which was the main focus of my preparation. But I think he simply wanted to avoid any theory, since I also played against him, by the way, already in the year, I think 2019, where I also made a draw. And in that game I went for this super forcing 4-knight Sicilian, where I was prepared for like 20 moves or so, and then it was a draw as well. So I think, judging from that game as well, he didn't want to go in any forcing variations. So we went knight f3, d5, g3, knight f6, and before the game I decided I will simply stick to this classical setup, which I also played against Moroni. And here he went for d3, not for c4. And I had this position in front of me in the morning. Since he's also a King's Indian player from the black side, therefore this system makes quite some sense for him. And he simply wants to go for this type of King's Indian position where white goes e4. And here I went for this move a5, which I've already checked a couple of years back, and I didn't check it much at all in the morning. I only checked here e4 when a4 seems good enough, and here I basically just stopped and I thought I will just play a game. But he went for the quite logical move a4 actually. By the way, just to mention, c5 is by far the main move. When after e4, knight c6, white has a couple of setups. The main thing to play for white is just this very easy idea, I would say, rook e1 followed by h4 and then knight f1, knight h2, knight g4, something like this. When black's position can be quite dangerous sometimes, because white will bring all his pieces to the king side, and black has to do something on the queen side to find counterplay, usually connected with b5, b4, and then a5, a4. But this position, since black's king is always in quite some danger, I didn't want to go there. And a5 keeps, black doesn't go c5 yet, and let's say white goes e4 here as well. Then after a4, now e5, knight d7, black usually gets some quick counterplay with f6, I think. Already now a3 is kind of an idea, so if white goes a3 now, there were a couple of ideas. I think knight c6 is one of them right away, and if d4, f6, black is just trying to counter in the center. I think this was one of the lines here. But he went for a4 and now knight c6. If I would go c5 now, it would be probably quite a significant strategic mistake, since now I will never have any counterplay on the queen side, since my pawns are fixed here. Let's say e4 now, knight c6, and even something like this, e5, knight d7, rook e1. We have the same position now, but even with the inclusion a5, a4, which is of course a much worse version for black, since there will be no counterplay with b5. So knight c6 is the move here. I still somewhat knew this, but after d4 here I started to think. I knew that there were a couple of ideas for black. d4 simply has the idea that white wants to stop e5, and he's even losing a tempo here, simply arguing that the knight on c6 is a bit misplaced now, since black would usually prefer the pawn to be on c5 now. I guess a more standard way of playing for white would be to go e4 when I intended to take, and then just go e5 when I guess the position is just equal here. I have two ideas, b6 followed by bishop a6 would be one, and if white goes c3, I also have this idea to bring the knight around to c5 when I have access to the square on d3. So he went d4, and here I went knight e4. I just checked with the computer. Bishop d6 seems like a very easy way for black. It's not the top choice of the computer, but I actually don't know what he would have played here. I didn't think about this move for some reason during the game, but black is simply pushing e5 next, and it seems like the position will just become super dry very soon. And yeah, let's say c3, e5, takes, and white probably has nothing better than to go e4 when basically everything is exchanged here, and game is most likely to end in a draw. So bishop d6 is probably the most solid and concrete way. I went for knight e4. I also considered b6. When after rook e1, bishop b7, e4, here I stopped my calculation probably a bit too early. It looked a bit dangerous for me because I thought white has some ideas with rook g4 and some attack possibly, and the knight on c6 is a bit misplaced, but it turns out that white has nothing here. Knight b4 seems to be the move, and if rook g4, black has even f5 when the rook is probably even getting trapped and not contributing to any sort of attack. So white would have to go for something like rook e1 when after c5 black has no problems at all. So black in general in this line has many roads to equality. So yeah, interesting idea I guess for one game, but I don't think this line is something to try that often with the white pieces. So I went for knight e4, which also seemed logical, and after c3 now I went f5. It is logical to play like this, but I do honestly prefer these two ways with either b6 or bishop d6. It looks a bit safer for black than what I played in the game. So now I went for this f5, this kind of stonewall idea, and I do have a fantastic version of the stonewall. Since usually white doesn't have the inclusion a4, a5, white has c4 as well, and now white can never really push c4 because the square on b4 is weakened. So I do have a great version of the stonewall, but now the position becomes very, very complex. He went knight e1, which is very logical, since white wants to go knight d3, knight f3, and then to control the square on f6. And here I went for bishop f6, which is probably not such a great move, since I'm running into one idea of him now. He took on e4. Instead of bishop f6, maybe something like king h8 would be a nice prophylactic move, since sometimes the position can open up when my king on g8 would run into some checks, and later on I could again play with b6, for example knight d3, b6. b6 right away I also thought about, but here I thought again I could run into some concrete issues, for example after takes, and however I take back, white will go f3 when the diagonal is opening up, and I'm probably a bit too slow to finish my development. So I went bishop f6, not that sure actually what the idea is, because e5 is anyway not a move I will most likely play. I guess I just wanted to control the square on e5. For example, after knight f3, now I intended to go b6, knight d3, and now I'm defending this square, and I thought I could go for something like g5 possibly, not allowing white to go for bishop f4, when I thought the position is just pretty unclear. But he took on e4. Yeah, not the best according to computer. Computer says knight d3 is the best move. And yeah, it's also around equal b6, knight f4, he says, but that does look a bit strange. I could also go king h8 again, and I guess after knight f3, maybe also g5 here. g5 is playable as well, or now b6. Position is around balanced. But he took an e4, which is also pretty logical. He wants to play in a concrete manner. And I think he kind of underestimated my move d takes e4. Because f takes e4 is the move which black usually wants to make. But now after f3, I'm in quite some trouble. I thought if I take now e takes f3. And if I manage to get e5, then I would be totally fine. But now I cannot do this because white has f4, and then he will pick up the pawn on d5. And if I don't go e5, I don't know, let's say king h8, then white will go f4 when I'm strategically just lost probably, because the pawn on e6 is a target forever. White has the square on e5, and yeah, my pieces are all just very passive here. So I took with the d pawn, which is the best choice, and now he anyway went f3, which is probably the only sensible idea. Otherwise, I will have ideas to push e5. f3, and now I spent quite some time. I took on f3 immediately. The better way to do it would be to push e5. I did think about this, but misevaluated one crucial position. So my issue was queen b3 check, king h8, and now d takes e5, knight takes e5, white takes on e4, takes again. And this position I just couldn't really evaluate. White is a pawn up, but the computer gives many ways for black to equalize. Something like bishop g4 just, and yeah, black's pieces are active, and white on the other hand is a bit underdeveloped. The king could become a bit weak, so yeah, this is the preferred choice of the computer. But I took on f3 first, and now I went e5, and here he went queen b3 check, king h8, and now d5, which I was a bit surprised to see. I was more worried about queen b3 check, king h8, and now d takes e5, when after knight takes e5, knight d4 seemed quite dangerous for me. But apparently I have enough resources here. Even g6 works, which during the game looked very dangerous for me, because white has all sorts of ideas with knight e6, bishop h6, also e4 opening up the position. But apparently this works for black. I also thought about bishop takes e5. But yeah, I'm glad this didn't come, because it would have brought me in quite a tough position to decide. This, of course, it's not a great move to play, but I just didn't want white to have this nice square on d4 for the knight. But of course now he would win the bishop pair, and yeah, I did not like my position as well here. So probably I would have gone for knight takes e5 anyway, which then would be fine after knight d4 g6 if I would have found this. g6 is also probably not the only move. Again, I could sometimes sacrifice the pawn on f5 as well for compensation. The computer said that d takes e5 here is the best way to play for something, and then simply to go in some position like this, I think. And here, something like this, he gave that white can try for something, but I thought whenever I can exchange queens, it shouldn't be that bad. But I am a bit underdeveloped, and white has a few squares here. Pawn on f5 could be a target. So, but yeah, computer gave some 0.20, 0.30 advantage. So I think this should be pretty holdable in a practical game. But he went for d5 here, and now knight e7. I also briefly thought about knight b8, but it just looked a bit strange. In general, if I'm able to develop my pieces, knight d7, knight c5, if this comes, I would probably be even in the driver's seat, but white has many ideas. I think here e4 was my problem, and I'm just super underdeveloped here, and after fe4, even knight g5 is coming, I thought, when I did not like my position. Probably it's just lost here. So I went knight e7 with the idea that now, after e4, which I actually also thought about, I thought I can take now, and after knight g5 I can take queen takes d5, I think. Which I was trying to calculate this here, bishop takes e4, and now h6, but I did not really think about this that much. After knight h7, rook d8, I had some thoughts here, but there was something pretty sick which I calculated. Let me think. After rook d1, I thought I always have some bishop g4 ideas, and if he takes here, I thought this should probably be a draw. Rook takes f6 now. If bishop h6, I guess I can just protect this pawn. Let's say rook a6. And if rook f6, I thought this should be a draw somehow. Rook d1 and opposite color bishops, king g2. I will probably lose this pawn, but I thought it should be somewhat holdable. Let's see how wrong I was in that calculation. I did not check this line yet. Okay, many mistakes here. Bishop e7 is the move. This. Oh, I even have king g7 here. Yeah, that is a draw, huh? But I do have even king g7 when now he cannot take because I have rook d1 and then rook takes c1 when I'm winning a piece. Okay, I just had to check this briefly, but anyway, it was complete nonsense what I calculated here. there were many things. E3 apparently is strong. When after bishop takes E3, I have knight F5. Yeah, makes a lot of sense actually. Now the bishop on E3 and the knight on G5 are both attacked, and otherwise black will probably have a tough time to win back the pawn. Also, there are some ideas with D6, but okay, now I can just take on G5 probably. But also during the game, he played knight G5, now E4. D6 was also a move I briefly thought about. When I thought queen takes D6 is also possible, knight F7, and this exchange sacrifice when the queen looks quite out of play. White's pieces are in a very bad shape. Also, the bishop on G2 doesn't do anything. So, but after D6, I also thought I have bishop takes G5. If he takes here, I simply won a pawn. But anyway, I have to watch out for some D6 ideas. Anyway, he went knight E6. I had to take back. I think I didn't explain everything here. Knight G5, just a second. Knight G5. I went E4. Yeah, that was important just to explain. Because I really need to block this bishop on G2, and otherwise White will probably have E4 sooner or later himself. So I went E4 myself. Knight E6, takes, queen D6 now. Probably not the only way, but I wanted to get queen c5 check when his bishop cannot go to e3 anymore. So he went bishop e3, and here a slight inaccuracy. I went queen d5 now, with the point that if he takes now, the bishop is attacked. He did take as well. For example, if I go queen d5 right away, now white can take and simply pick up the pawn on f5. Since bishop d4, c takes d4, rook f5, bishop takes e4, I thought I'm just lost because white will win back the exchange. If rook h5, there's, for example, g4. And yeah, therefore I thought this doesn't work. But with the inclusion of bishop e3, now he cannot take on f5 because now the bishop on e3 is hanging. Instead of queen d5, I should have gone for something like queen c6 though, and then just rook d8, which also seems very logical. I was just afraid if the queens are still on the board, white will maybe have some attack with g4 possibly, just opening up the position. And I thought in an endgame it should be more manageable in general. He took, which was good, and now he went bishop c5, which lets the advantage slip away. Bishop d2 would have caused probably quite some troubles for me, since white will always have g4 to come. For example, if g6, g4, and the position is probably a bit dangerous for me, because always if I take here, then I'm, I guess, already in quite some trouble, because now the bishop is opening up. And yeah, otherwise the pawn on f5 might just drop off. So bishop d2 would have been pretty dangerous for me. But fortunately went bishop c5, and now bishop e7, and here he took. And here in general white has to be pretty fast not to be worse, because if I manage to get g6, king g7, king f6, white will not be able to defend the pawn on e6. So here he correctly decided to open up the position right away to find counterplay. After g4, I just went g6, since I didn't really want to take and let him open the bishop. Even something like this might be okay somehow, but now white will also be able to activate this rook, and he can always take on f8 and then infiltrate on the 7th rank, so this doesn't look very good for me. So I wanted to keep the position closed with g6. Now he went h4. He did play somewhat of a waiting game, since it's not that easy for me to actually find a move here. King g7 would look logical, but now white has this idea. He can take and then take on e4, and now I cannot take back because rook f7 picks up the piece, and white wants some material and is probably winning here. So I did went for b6 here, just prophylactically putting the pawn on a dark square where it cannot be captured. And he played e3, another sort of waiting move. And here I decided to play king g8, which I probably could have done here right away as well. But I did play it here, and now my idea is to go rook d6. I cannot go rook d6 right away, because then white would take, and again, he has bishop takes e4 when there is this pin on the f-file, and white wins a pawn. Therefore, I went king g8 just to prepare rook d6 when, after the exchanges, the rook on f8 is protected. Now he decided to take, g takes f5, bishop h3, and here I went rook d6. He did take on d6, c takes d6, rook d1, and now we went for the repetition, which actually white has to go for this. Otherwise, if I have one more move, then king g7 comes, followed by king f6, king takes e6, and I'm simply a pawn up and probably winning the game. So he really has to go for this. I'm Otherwise, I'm just getting king g7, king f6. And d5, I thought I shouldn't go because trying to play for a win, because after c4, now I have to take rook d6, I thought, or even rook d7, probably both fine. But rook d6, he will pick up the pawn, and now the pawn on e6 is also always protected as well. So I had to go for this repetition as well, which is fine, of course, against such a strong player. There was some idea for me actually to play on here, which is to take on d1 now, and instead of rook d6, here I played rook d6, but rook takes d1 was interesting. And after rook d1, now king g7, rook d7, king f6, rook takes d7, and now rook b8, this idea, which I saw in another position. But yeah, I just saw rook d6 is at least a draw for me, and he has to go for the repetition, so I went for this. But this would have been a try to play for something, possibly, since white has to be a bit careful because the bishop is just so bad. And I am threatening to go b5 here. The computer gave rook a7 for some reason, and after b5 now, takes, and there were a couple of options. One line which the computer gave was b4, when after takes, rook b4, rook takes e7 is holding a draw, I think it was here. And after king e7, bishop f5, something like this was a draw. Maybe it was a bit different. Maybe it was with king f2 here, that's possible. And here b4, and yeah, that should be a draw, because yeah, it was like this, and now king g3, king f4, white will win the pawn, should be a draw. But white has to be a little bit careful here already. The other line was here to go for something else. I think it was bishop f1 possibly, rook takes b2, rook takes a5, when again white has to be a little bit careful because his pieces are a bit passive. But yeah, I went for the repetition, which I'm obviously pretty happy about. And I think the game in general was pretty high quality as well. This move queen d5 was the only slight inaccuracy, and I'm really lucky that he didn't find bishop d2, which would have posed some issues for me in the game. But yeah, 7 games, 7 draws. Today, of course, a draw is pretty good against such a great player. And yeah, let's see if in the last 2 games I'll be able to score a win. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's recap. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Other than that, take care and see you tomorrow.